Thunder Grunt.
Blockbusters, the show that treats the final edit of a movie like the script. Today we're going to do a movie that's precious to all of us, but first we're going to introduce ourselves.
Hi, I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and script consultant. My Twitter handle is @JimmyRGeorge.
And I am Jamie Nash. I am a screenwriter and writer of Save the Cat Writes for TV, now available at Amazon. My Twitter handle is @Jamie like I need to say right? Jamie_Nash. And my Parler handle, no, I don't know. Parler. Does
Parler even exist anymore?
No, I don't know. With all this, down with Facebook, I was wondering if it would make a new turn or something, but
what's
that's
your
another
WhatsApp,
podcast.
Jamie? And I'm Bob Rose. I'm @ThunderGruntBob, and I am happy to say that today, for October, we're going to do a classic, which is Ghostbusters, which I feel like is. I think when we started this show, we talked about like 4 or 5 movies that were like the gems that the three of us consider.
Yeah,
like the Mount Rushmore of movies, and I think this would be one of them, right, guys?
This is on there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we talked about Galaxy Quest. That's
Back to the
Future. Off the list. Back to the Future.
Raiders Lost Ark.
Raiders Lost Ark. We're hitting
Gremlins,
this one now.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Right.
I could probably list half of Spielberg's, first 10 movies, like
right.
Jaws, Close Encounters, something. But
we'll get to Jaws eventually next summer. Maybe
it'll get redundant.
And Jurassic Park.
We did in Jurassic Park. We did E.T., right? We did that.
No, we haven't done E.T.
Oh, I thought we did.
It's not a Spielberg podcast, Jamie. Come on.
Okay.
Not that I wouldn't do a Spielberg podcast, but
okay. I know we did Raiders, but whatever.
Yeah, but I feel like this is like Mount Rushmore material for us. Mm-hmm. So before we get into our outline, let's go around the room. Go around the Zoom. And say what this movie means to all of us, and keep it short. Don't talk about your, I was born a young child.
I was 4 when this came out. I mean, I used to construct before even the toy line. I used to take like wood in my garage and make like terrible ecto ones. And I love the cartoon. I'm a huge fan of this. I had all the toys growing up. This probably stayed. Ghostbusters was a mainstay of my childhood, probably for like at least 7 or 8 years of it. So yeah, and I love these movies.
Yeah. So I was a kid that loved spooky stuff. Like I like Scooby-Doo. I have a picture of Scooby-Doo behind me. Also,
it looks like you're pointing to your Exorcist poster.
Yeah, it's just behind it. So it's over there.
Okay.
Got the cell. You see the cell?
Nice.
So I was into Scooby-Doo. I was into I used to love the scary episodes of like the Brady Bunch, like when the UFO, the Tiki Doll, or the Halloween haunted house episode, anything that mixed in a little scary. But when I was a kid, I did watch the Filmation Ghostbusters show. It was a TV show, and it was weird. The show would come on Sundays. I can't remember. Let me look up. It says original release was 1975, but I remember it used to come on Sunday mornings, and it was almost like it was really weird. They used to do strange stuff in my area with shows where it wouldn't come on every Sunday. It was almost like an anthology. Like 1 week it would be on, and then the next week it would be some black and white Ma and Pa Kettle movie. And then the next week it would be another black and white movie, and then it would be on, and then it was always rotating. So whenever I remember before church, I used to catch this show, and I used to think it was, I don't know, it was like everything I wanted in a show. Like I used to like Tim Conway and Don Knotts and stuff. They're like The Private Eyes is one of my favorite movies as a kid. I love that movie. So go and on the flip side of that, see, I'm turning this into a long story. On the flip side of that,
I know I tried to make mine like 30 seconds.
My early film, like, it's one of the most important things in my early film stuff was Saturday Night Live. Like, I was a child of that generation. So the first R-rated movie I saw was The Blues Brothers. I was a huge Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi fan. I saw 1941, Spielberg again. So I love Saturday Night Live. So when this thing came out, I was all in. It like mixed two of my favorite things together, kind of the spooky comedy, whatever, and Saturday Night Live. And it hit both of those things. However, strangely enough, I remember when it came out, it wasn't like my immediate favorite movie of all time. It took me, I almost came back to it a little later. I don't know what I was expecting from it when I first saw it as a kid. Like, I think I was expecting Saturday Night Live, but I really wanted more jokes, but I also wanted more spooky, and I couldn't quite wrestle the two together. And it took me a few years to realize, oh, this wasn't just a comedy. They weren't making fun of the horror stuff and the ghost stuff. It was actually more like Back to the Future or something like that. It took me a little while to wrestle my kid brain around what I actually saw, because I think I was expecting more Tim Conway and Don Knotts and less of a thing. And then it became my favorite movie over time, or one of my favorite, not my favorite, but one of my favorites, one of my top 10 movies, and one I wanted to emulate and write as a screenwriter for many years to come. So, but honestly, when I first saw it, not that I disliked it, I just always was like, what was it that I was expecting that I didn't get? And do
you think it was because like you hadn't been hit with that tone maybe at that age? Yeah.
Well, I saw, I can't remember, was this prior to Back to the Future or
it's
or
84.
after?
Back to the Future was 85. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah, it could be. It could be. I'm trying to think of what other movies would have hit me around that time that would have mixed, because there's not a ton of movies like this, is the strange thing.
Yeah.
Up to that point, no.
And even after, like, I'm surprised they don't make like one of these movies, a month, because they're hard. Like, you can almost list them, right? It's like Galaxy Quest, Men in Black, Ghostbusters. And Back to the Future, strangely, I'd put in the mix where it's kind of comedy, half adventure.
Heavy on both, but yeah.
And then there are probably some failures, like My Girlfriend Was a Superhero or whatever.
My Super Ex-Girlfriend, which is Ivan Reitman.
Which is Ivan Reitman.
Evolution. I like Evolution, which is Ivan Reitman too.
Evolution, which isn't bad, but just there's
I like
something.
it, but I'm not going to say it's great.
Yeah.
But there's not a ton. Like, I can't list like hundreds of these movies, like an action movie. I mean, I guess there's some lesser ones, like lower budget versions of these things. But yeah, so it's always been it's a super important movie to me, in that I always wanted to write one of those movies that we just listed. And I never really have gotten the chance, because they're not your usual movie. They're not. I think they'd actually be really popular on spec. You'd think, right? I've attempted to write these movies, but at least my version nobody cares about.
Just to be clear, when you say these movies, you mean movies of this type of tone?
The thing I just listed,
right,
which has this weird comedy. I'm going to call it like sci-fi comedy. I'm going to use sci-fi very loosely here. Sci-fi fantasy comedy, some kind of supernatural hokum element that mixes in with the funny, So yeah. Anyway, that's my long ass answer.
Yeah. I'll try to keep it somewhere in between the two of you. Jamie, unlike you, I'm a little younger. This movie is what got me into Saturday Night Live. Like, I didn't come to it because I was too young, but this is what gave my lifelong obsession with Saturday Night Live for the next 40 years. I haven't missed an episode in like at least 30 years of Saturday Night Live.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't talk about it much because who do you talk
to? Yeah, I had
anymore?
never knew that.
yeah, I'm a huge Saturday Night Live fan, and like when at that, like, I consider Ghostbusters kind of nexus of that happening, because I didn't know who those guys were until I saw this thing on probably VHS, because I was born in 82. So no clue. But to keep it short, there's two franchises that I consider in my childhood that are untouchable, which is Ghostbusters and Ninja Turtles. We've already talked about Ninja Turtles, but those are the two that I played the most. Those are the ones that I had the action figures of. That ruled my entire life. That was my entire existence until, I don't know, suddenly I noticed girls. You know what I mean? Like, that was literally all that mattered, those two things. So Ghostbusters is like one of the things holding up my entire consciousness. It actually, like,
wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Ghostbusters is such a pillar in my brain that it actually annoys me. It annoys me we're even talking about it, because I'm like, it's such a perfect thing that should be considered perfect that I don't even want people to question it or examine it. I'm like, it's already been decided. It's already history. Don't even talk about it. Don't touch it. When I'm not talking about it, but when 2016 happened, one of my biggest annoyances was people revisiting it and hearing their opinions about it actually angered me, because the slightest bit of pushback on Ghostbusters, I was like, ugh. Don't say anything about my boy. I love him too much. So yeah, I love this movie a lot, and I've seen it probably more than most movies.
Yeah. Well, here's a weird SNL tidbit about me that I realized. I've had a recurring dream. You know, most people have that thing where you haven't studied for the test or something. I have a recurring dream since I was like probably a teenager, where I'm a cast member of SNL and I don't know what's going on. Or it's a really weird thing. And I still get it to this day. It kind of morphs around. Or I'm a writer on SNL.
Right.
And like I have like an hour to write my sketch and I can't figure it out. That's my stress dream. Like that most people get the one. That's my stress dream.
And you're naked. No.
And I'm naked.
Well, that's actually kind of a perfect transition, though, Jamie, to who wrote this shit, right? Like, I think because we can talk about the kind of origin of where this came from.
That's right, because I wrote this.
Yeah, Jamie Nash wrote this.
I wrote this. Dan Aykroyd actually took the credit, as well as Harold Ramis. But I wrote it. No, so Aykroyd and Harold Ramis wrote it. It's the origin of it, and I didn't do the research, but I remember this. I remember enough of it. Maybe you can help me from what you know. I think the origin of this, of course, Dan Aykroyd was a big supernatural UFO conspiracy kind of guy. Is he's probably more so now, or at least he's more open now, about it. Yeah, he's dug in deep, and he wrote Ghostbusters kind of a serious version of it first. Like, there was a first draft that had, and I've never read it, even though it's out there. I think there's lots of PDFs you could read of his draft. I think I'm not positive, but he wrote kind of a serious, more sci-fi version where Ghostbusters were kind of already existed in a future world where they were like plumbers, and you just call them up. And there were multiple franchises. They were kind of competing and things like that. And that was his first.
It's funny
draft.
We never got there, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels like a natural progression.
Yeah, we've never gotten there. Yeah, I guess cartoons, but
I almost thought that was where they would take it in the kind of, even in the sequel that came out a few years back that everybody went crazy over or whatever. But there was a part of me that thought maybe they'd even go there at that point. It would be like, in some way, in some lesser way, like maybe there are multiple competing franchises. But yeah, anyway, so there was some more serious version. I think when Ivan Reitman got involved, he kind of looked at this and said, yeah, this is a great concept, but this thing's nutty, and it would cost too much money, and maybe, and I think it was Ivan Reitman's idea to set it in New York, make it a going into business story. And then at some point, he suggested bringing Harold Ramis in. The two, Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, kind of co-wrote the drafts that we know and love. There's, of course, the Eddie Murphy was originally cast in it. Of course, John Belushi was originally cast in it as well. I think it was those three that were going to be the cast. And then after John Belushi passed, they kind of had to retool it. I think Eddie Murphy got too big or something like that for the movie, so they kind of changed that character to a lesser character.
Yeah, there's conflicting stuff, like but nothing definitively said. They kind of try to, talk around the issue. But one report I read said that he had to film Beverly Hills Cop when they were planning on filming Ghostbusters, and so that was officially the nail in the coffin of him being in this movie. And then there's that, of course, that I've heard it's on the Movies That Made Us Netflix episode, which is great. If anyone listening hasn't seen that, it's great. Check it out. Where Ernie Hudson, that role, it was still in the script, and he came to set assuming that he was going to have this big role. And he said, he even talked about, he was in the movie starting on page 8. And when he got to set the first day, they handed him a different script. And he was like, what is this? And they were like, well, the studio wanted us to give Bill more stuff to do. So he was like, in the script they handed me, I didn't come onto the page until page 68, which is a huge difference. Now, he doesn't come into the movie 70 minutes into it. So it's interesting to think about, like, where are those like 20 where are those 20 pages we didn't see, because he comes in way earlier than that. But he said, I heard him say that, like, page 68.
I watched him talk at a con about this once, and he said pretty much, he was like, he was very understanding about it. Like, he doesn't consider it like some kind of insult. He was like, if you understood at the time what Eddie Murphy meant, I was a nobody. He's like, the fact that they would give more to Vakeman.
Man, that's so interesting, because I read an article last night, Entertainment Weekly, with him, where he said he was absolutely devastated, and he was like, "This is terrible." Maybe it was because
he was talking to a crowd. I don't know.
Yeah,
he seemed fine. Like, he understood that part of it.
Yeah.
Maybe he meant he understood why it happened, but
it's just. It's interesting, all the stories out there, and you don't know what's truth and what's...
I think when you talk a lot like that, you got to mix it up sometimes. You get bored of your own story.
Right.
Like, mix it up.
Also, it's a bunch of guys talking about something that happened like 40 years ago, so...
Who knows what... things... Exactly.
I think, but I think he was devastated, but what I saw him say was he understood why Eddie Murphy would be a big change to him.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and just to go along with that, looking at the box office for 1984, and there's one part of this that I find very interesting. I bet I know why this happens. I'll explain in a second. So, if you look at Box Office Mojo, it has Ghostbusters listed as #1 domestically for 1984, but I think Beverly Hills Cop is actually might have edged it out. It has, but anyway, I'm just going to go with Box Office Mojo here for a second. Ghostbusters, Temple of Doom, Gremlins, Karate Kid.
Wow.
Now you're going to like number 5 though. Police Academy.
Yeah.
Hey, wow.
All right.
Footloose, Beverly Hills Cop, Search for Spock, Terms of Endearment, Romancing the Stone, and Splash.
Wow.
How do you like that? How do you like that?
Whenever you read these old top 10 lists, I'm like, movies, man, they used to be different.
Yeah. Well, and then I was thinking, like, are there any franchise? But there is. Temple of Doom is in there, and Search for Spock. So you, even then in 84, you had 2 sequels.
And Police Academy.
Police Academy.
Oh, that was one. Though,
was that
right?
the first one though?
Oh, I see.
I'm saying, like, even in 1984, you had 2 sequels in the top 10 there.
I see.
Yeah, but what's the top 10 now? We don't look it up, but I'm sure it's
just all franchise.
The top 10 has got to be 100% franchise.
Yeah.
It's well, this year, who knows what it is? It's probably
true.
Yeah, right.
It's probably like Quiet Place, Bond, whatever it is. There's probably a couple weird things, but yeah, I'm sure if you looked at 2019, it's sequel, super movie, animated movie, sequel, or something like that.
Yeah. The one thing I always like to point out too is the reason this movie is so well written is, I think, because Aykroyd and he's kind of crazy and his writing is crazy, and Ramis was the perfect formula to pull him back in. You know what I mean? Like, he actually he's like the rein on Dan Aykroyd to keep him perfectly in balance. Because if not, you get something like a movie I love very much, you get Nothing But Trouble. like watch Nothing But Trouble if you want to see what Ghostbusters might have been like had Ramis not had any say. You know what I mean? Like it would have been something that nuts.
I'm sure Reitman knew what he was doing when he was like, maybe you could use some help with this one.
Right.
Maybe you need this. You got some great ideas, but you got to kind of rein it in. You need another person. Honestly, that makes for a great co-writing team. I've co-written a lot of stuff, and that's kind of when you get the magic when there is somebody there to kind of almost force you with the discipline while you're kind of going wild with the ideas. That can be a really good combo. I
feel like this movie without Ramis would have been a lot more mumbo jumbo. I
Definitely.
think Aykroyd would have went way too deep on that kind of stuff that no one cares about.
Right.
Yeah. But
would have went deep into Tobin's Spirit Guide.
Yeah, we would have got a lot more.
But you know what? If Aykroyd wrote a Tobin Spirit Guide, I'd buy a copy and read it. Like
I think it exists.
But it might be a fan written thing. I mean, I want like Aykroyd to write it himself, and it comes with a Crystal Head vodka when you buy it. So on this show, we have once or twice mentioned this book called Save the Cat, I think.
Yeah, just
a few times. Jamie, I think you're sort of familiar with it.
Yeah.
But
it's a polarizing book.
Yeah, right. It's probably
like a bunch of people just logged off.
Yeah, a bunch of hacks over here talking about the Save the Cat. This movie has a pretty incredible Save the Cat beat sheet, right, guys?
Yeah. Well, Blake Snyder himself wrote this movie.
With you, Jamie.
Yeah.
No, I thought we could frame this conversation in a Save the Cat thing so we could take it in order while also kind of talking Save the Cat a little bit.
Yeah.
So, and this movie falls into some cool Save the Cat discussions. It pretty much follows. There's some debate, I'd say, about the midpoint. And then it does some unconventional things too. So I just thought it would be a good way to organize, and because this is a movie we want to walk through almost not beat for beat, but section by section. And just by framing our conversation and giving each other a chance to talk about certain sections, that's how we're going to try to do it today.
Yeah,
so it's going to be
a little different.
Yeah.
Slightly. It's really just an organization. So we're gonna take you through a long Save the Cat beat sheet, but in each section, we're going to go into different aspects that will deviate from Save the Cat. It's just a way to organize our kind of flow. So with that said, why don't we get started with our Save the Cat beat sheet? So the Save the Cat beats, there's 15 beats. I'll kind of introduce each one as we go through, and I'll do it really briefly because, again, it's more an organizing tool, and I think you'll catch on. They're pretty simple to understand if you don't already know them. So the first beat is the opening image. And the opening image, if you hear it described, it could be anything from a entire teaser, which is how I kind of describe it, and Save the Cat writes for TV a lot. It's almost a teaser, or it could literally be an opening image. I mean, it could be an opening shot. And I think in this one we get two different things that you could kind of describe, and keep in mind, Save the Cat beat sheets, when you do them reverse engineer, I personally don't think that's the best way to use them. I think the best way to use them is to come up with your own ideas and pull your ideas out. It's like an inspirational tool, because sometimes things don't fit after they go through post-production, or when Harold Ramis gets his dirty hands on it, starts changing things around. Sometimes things don't fit. So I'm not one of these people that think, oh, it didn't have the right midpoint, it's a bad movie or something like that.
Right.
But the funny thing is this movie still works, I think, with it. So the funny thing about the opening image I find in this movie is it starts with architecture. And I think that's kind of an interesting opening shot, that they're showing, like, those statues outside the library, and they're almost like symbolizing like this built-in ghostly architecture of New York City. That always kind of struck me. That it starts with architecture, and architecture plays a key point in kind of the supernatural mythology of the movie.
Literally, it's the antenna, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but you could also just describe the opening image as the whole library section. That whole section.
From a construction standpoint, yeah.
from a construction standpoint.
And when you say the whole section, you mean not just you mean the opening, or when they actually show up too?
It's all in the eye of the beholder. Like I've seen people describe the opening image of like Raiders of the Lost Ark as the opening sequence. It's all like depending on how you get to it. I'd probably describe it as the part up to the credit sequence. That's how I would probably describe this opening image. But again, use the tool as you wish.
Do you guys want to talk about genre here a bit, or do you want to wait until we get into the setup?
I think it's a good time to talk about the genre.
About it. Yeah.
So Jamie, it's funny what you were talking about. You were kind of calling this sci-fi, and I don't disagree, but I think for me, like something that doesn't get talked about, at least when I hear, we just talked about this movie for like 20 minutes before we actually talked about the craft of it.
Right.
For me, this is a horror movie, straight up. This is a horror comedy. And I think that often gets, it's sort of like the thing that's talked about the least. Like the scares are scary, and the genre aspect, like it's always horror first, comedy second. And when I was trying to before we decided how we were going to organize this episode, I was going to bring up the tone scale, Jamie. Your tone, your typical tone scale, but I couldn't even think of, like you said earlier, like there weren't many movies like this at this time. So like, how would they have even, what would have even gone on their list, right? Like we talk about the tone scale. You want to kind of bounce off that for me?
Well,
sure.
Which Batman is this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, tone scale is just like trying to find, to make a scale of 1 to 10 and assign each number a certain tone of movie, a certain, how light is it? How dark is it? Is it gritty? Is it funny? Is it silly? Are the stakes real? Is it meant to scare? And if you can find comparison movies to set your tone and kind of create a scale of your own, you just make it up yourself. You can kind of check and balance as you write whether your writing falls on the tone of the scale you set. So, like Bob said, Batman is the obvious one because there's so many different iterations of Batman. You have the dark, gritty Batman. That might be Christopher Nolan. That might be, let's say, an 8 or 9. And then you might have Zack Snyder might come down to a 7 or something like that, maybe. I don't know. And then Adam West is a 1 or
1
or Lego
Lego
Batman.
Batman's a 2 or 3.
Is a 2 or 3.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
What are the movies you'd put in this? You're right. From the time period, it's really hard. I'd really have to adjust my.
Well, they didn't have that. They didn't have those Batmans.
Yeah. So it's sort of, it must have been groundbreaking in its handling of tone.
I think the genius conceit is that what you said, Jimmy, is that Ivan Reitman, I'm going to give him credit. He probably said, I'm going to make a horror movie with those guys in it. And that created a tone without maybe him knowing without them not even knowing what the tone would be. Right? Like, it kind of presented itself as such.
Yeah, that's a good way. That's
you know what I mean?
How it all grew, was grown about.
What if Bill Murray was in a horror movie as Bill Murray?
What does that look like?
What does that look like? And I'm going to try to make that.
But like, because the other movies, the other Ghostbusters, they're less horror movies. And I think that's why people tend to lean toward this one, because it's a ghost movie, right? Like, I mean, the ghosts are scary, and the comedy is always sort of second. It's there. It has a purpose. It's there to relieve the horror tension, and that creates that sense of fun in every one of these scenes.
And that usually happens with stuff like this, right? Like Men in Black had the same problem.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. This movie is doing is it's taking like a real horror movie premise and it's throwing goofballs in it. So I always say, like, comedies, really, most comedies, there are some exceptions, but very few. Either you have a real world with goofy people or you have goofy people in a real world. It's usually it's rare when you get goofy, and that's another kind of movie. It's like one or the other
cheeseburger.
One or the other is the straight man, whether the world's the straight man or the characters are the straight man.
That's a good way to say it.
Usually one side or the other. And I think this movie, what you're pointing to, is the ghosts, even the evil ghosts. It's like, you have Gozer and Zool, and they're like really serious. They don't make jokes. There's nothing silly about them.
Yeah.
Which is one of the things that the
even
leader
Slimer is sort of serious. He just looks
funny.
funny.
He's scared. He's
Yeah.
He doesn't become funny until the cartoons, right?
No one could see me actually impersonating Slimer,
Yeah, no one
but that's
could
what
see
I was doing.
I think that's that, and that's honestly, I think, what threw me off when I was a kid watching it. I was like,
Right.
Is this serious? Wait, these are my Saturday Night Live guys that I want to really get into and laugh and be silly. But then it did have things I loved, like the horror tone and stuff like that. And then honestly, if it has anything that threw me off a little bit, certain things like the refrigerator and stuff felt a little sillier than I'd be used to in a horror movie. You know what I mean? Like, which you open the refrigerator and there's stuff going on in there. That part felt a little like them making fun of horror, but the rest of it didn't as much. And I remember as a kid, I was always thrown off maybe by the names or how he talked about all the mythology and stuff like that, because it seemed like, but that's why I think I graduated to more like, oh no, that stuff is all serious. It's just kind of goofy people talking about it.
Exactly.
Also, a lot of this too is not. Some of it's not writing, right? Like I would say Ghostbusters is also shot like a horror movie, which. Well, I know it's a script podcast, but
the aesthetics and the score,
are not goofy.
Right.
Like, yes, the Marshmallow Man looks goofy, but the way he's shot and presented is not goofy. That's how the whole movie looks.
But when I was watching last night, the one place that sometimes violates that, because I agree 100%, it's this grounded reality, and I think New York plays a big part of that.
It's a great New York movie,
great New York movie. Sometimes the score can get a little silly. Some kind of
silly, plays up the goof.
Sometimes that's about the only part that I noticed when I was rewatching last night. I was like, sometimes the score is doing, let's be funny here.
And that's not really the writing. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
No, but I thought about. Hell no. I know, Bob. We're not going to attack your baby.
I know.
No, but I thought about doing, but I didn't, and maybe we can do it in a later episode. Sort of instead of a good news, bad news. You know how we've broken down sequences and showed the good news, bad news technique and how it's effective. Like the library sequence, both of them. It's like a 1-2 punch with the setup of the librarian down there. And her experience with the ghost as its own horror scene. And then when the Ghostbusters actually come down there, there's this great back and forth of dread, terror, all the horror tools that we talk about in other episodes. Dread, terror, gross out.
Yes.
Laugh. Dread, terror, gross out, laugh. Dread, terror, gross out, laugh. And if you watch it, there's this rhythm to each of the horror scenes where they are every time they're building all that tension using your classic genre techniques, and then bam, here comes a laugh, like, oh my god, here's the books on the thing, and and it's super scary, and Ray and Egon are taking it super serious, and it's made to feel scary, and then here comes Bill Murray saying yes, because no human would ever stack books like this, right? So it's that library, that 1-2 punch of those two library sequences is really like what sets the genre and tone, and it's like such a great instructive way to balance horror and comedy, I think. If you're trying to learn that.
I think Bill Murray almost functions as, for my reference back then, as like a Harrison Ford kind of character in those movies where it can kind of be modern and comment on things like Han Solo might be able to in the middle of a more serious action sequence or something. There might be
he's like almost the audience surrogate Ghostbuster.
Yeah, because Ray and Egon don't see it.
No.
They would just straightforwardly see everything as is. They don't even see how they're silly themselves. So
Yeah. No, it's almost like Harold Ramis's character's like almost like Drax from Guardians.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's kind of a similar character. And then Dan Aykroyd's almost like a big kid about everything. Like there's something.
He's super jazzed about everything, which is a lot like Galaxy Quest and Tony Shalhoub's character.
Right. Well, which was funny because when you said the tone scale, when I was thinking about modern things, I was going to almost put the Marvel movies on the spectrum of this movie.
Yeah.
Because I think this movie falls more in line with that, and
Guardians.
Guardians, and then maybe even go further where like Thor and Iron Man are in the higher end of the spectrum or something like that. And then Ghostbusters is somewhere in the middle with Guardians, Dancing with Guardians, because it's the stakes are just as real in this. The people are just as real, but still there's a certain level of fun to it that we're not totally freaked out or scared about it. We're able to have fun with it and engage. Yeah.
And I think that library sequence does a good job of kind of telling the audience that they're always going to be feeling like they're in mortal danger. We're always going to be feeling that for them too, but most likely they're not going to get hurt by the ghost when they actually get attacked by the ghost.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about how the opening scene sets up the ghost logic and lack of.
Yeah, I think it's really instructive. It's very much like the we talked about in the Gremlins episode, and we talked about it in Groundhog Day, Harold Ramis. The more you explain things, like why things are happening, like how it works, the more it falls apart, and you can like micro analyze it while it's happening. The more you describe it, so like we talked.
Movie reviewers love that, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. They just start picking it apart.
Right.
So like in the Gremlins, there was originally a fourth rule that explained that, like, where they talked about why the Gremlins wouldn't replicate in the snow because it's water still, to address the heckler of, well, what about all the snow?
Right.
And then they eventually cut it out because the whole thing fell apart. And just like the original drafts of Groundhog Day, Bill Murray's character, Phil, had pissed off a witch and she cursed him. And there was a whole backstory to why he was trapped in the time loop. And then adding that, it all fell apart because people were analyzing all of her magic and all these things. And what about the witch? And so they decided that it was better if they didn't explain the logic of the time loop and how it worked, and just, he's trapped in this time loop and he can't get out. And so I think the same thing, there's another instructive example here in Ghostbusters where they don't really explain the logic of the ghosts. Like, you pretty much learn, like, they are
the ghosts leave ectoplasm. You can see them. They can move things sometimes. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes they can be invisible. Sort of.
Yeah. It's pretty simple, right?
Yeah, like it's kind of cartoon ghost logic.
Yeah, there's so little rules that you feel like anything could happen, and it's okay.
But I'd also argue that they do a good job, since you guys said like Vakeman is our doorway into the movie, sort of. They do a good job of saying, like, he doesn't understand what Ray and Egon are saying. He's a bad scientist. He doesn't understand what they're saying, and we don't need to either.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what I do love about this opening sequence is, like, it's him just going along with these two guys who we don't know how they got hooked up in life. We're just accepting that they are. But I've always questioned, like, where is his mindset on this going in? He doesn't seem to believe in ghosts, and even when he's presented with it, he's like, okay. Like, he just kind of goes along with whatever they say, and he doesn't really question the logic that they're giving him or the science that they're spouting off. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that helps us go along with it without questioning it. You know? Yeah,
especially since, like, he's our audience surrogate.
Right. He's just like, Egon, what's going on? He tells him, and he just goes, okay. And that's like us saying, okay, you know?
Yeah, that's true. That's really good.
Yeah. That goes for the whole movie, too, not just the scene, right?
Yeah.
I won't hit like all the beats quite as long, but I think some of the early ones I really want to talk about. And then as we go on, I'll kind of highlight. So I'm going to kind of mix up setup and theme stated. So the setup beat, which is the next beat, or theme stated, depending. Sometimes people put theme stated ahead. I think Blake Snyder does. Sometimes they put setup. Theme stated beat usually floats somewhere within the setup, in my opinion. It just floats somewhere. It could be at the first scene of the setup. It could be the middle scene. It kind of floats. So the setup section is usually the section where characters have a stasis equals death, which means the characters have to change. Their life is stuck. They're stuck in a rut. There's some kind of problem with their life. There's something flawed about their lives. Something needs to move on. And the theme stated beat usually comes when somebody calls them on their flaw. Usually some character will come up and say, one day you have to reckon and being a pirate with, your life or something. That's what happens in this movie.
I was going to say, Jamie, I think we talked about this prior. I think we're going to end up having the same theme because we were both talking about, like, we want to give each other which theme we think the movie actually has.
So, yeah.
It's confusing. It is, I think.
I mean, and after watching this movie a lot, I view this as Bill Murray's movie.
Yes.
So I nudge him to the front. He gets the love interest. He kind of gets the arc. I don't know that the other two are quite as much as him, at least personality wise. So for me, it all comes down to my theme with him, and we can talk about possibilities because it's very debatable. Bob brought up a video that says there is no theme actually, and
I brought it. Yeah, the video I was talking about was by Patrick Willems. I'm a big fan of his. Yeah, you've seen some of his stuff. He loves this movie. It's not an insult. It's not a takedown video. It's him talking about what the movie is about, and he goes through several themes and sort of says how they're all there, but they're all half put together. There's not completely a whole. He also argues that nobody in this movie arcs. So I think you might disagree with him there already, Jamie. Right. I sort of agree with him, but not in a bad way.
Right. Yeah, what is the theme that you think, Bob?
So I was going to say my personal view on where the theme mostly is, if I'm with a gun to my head, is the guy that, like Jamie said, is calling him out.
Yes.
He says, Dr. Venkman, we believe, the college, we believe the purpose of science is to serve mankind. You, however, seem to regard science as some kind of dodge or hustle. And I think in the end, the movie proves to the audience that science is there to serve mankind and it isn't some kind of dodge or hustle. I don't know that the movie shows us that Venkman learns these things. That's, I think, the downfall of that, maybe, because it doesn't really complete that thought with Venkman. But we learn it.
So I definitely would call that out as the theme stated.
Okay, so we were thinking the same thing.
Yeah, but my take on it is a little more nuanced, and I think he goes from like a con man kind of guy that really is doing things just to get girls and electric shock people in the beginning, and in the end he's sacrificing his life for the good of New York City. So I think he does that sort of through Dana and moving through, how he feels about Dana and how he's trying to do things there. But I think he does arc in a sense. He goes from the con man guy in the beginning to somebody actually trying to, sacrifice his own life for the greater good in the end.
When you say it like that, Jamie, I don't want to cut you off. You got more to say on it?
I don't disagree with you, Jamie, but to some degree, I think that the person he was at the beginning would have done that. I think it's just who he was. That's the Bill Murray
of it all, I think.
Yeah,
I don't know if he would have. You meet him as a pretty selfish guy.
Yeah, but selfish in the way that he's like selfish in his own life. I think that guy would still like serve.
I don't know.
His community.
Jamie,
my take is, and we'll get into this more as it goes, but or we could just talk about it now and skim this part.
It's a hard thing to talk about.
As he goes, I mean, he's the guy who comes up with, we got to make money out of this. He's happy. He's like, yeah, we're out of here. He's all about the money and making money and cashing in.
Self-involved.
He's tricking Dan Aykroyd's character into,
mortgaging his house.
He's doing all this stuff. But by the end, he's actually a hero who's willing to call out the mayor and go up in the thing and kill himself for New York City.
And I think that what you're saying there, that's definitely measurable. I don't know if the before is measurable. We talk about the before and after snapshots. The before isn't super measurable.
The only reason I push back on it is because he has to be presented with these things for us to know, kind of. Like you know what I mean?
I think that my only problem with it, and the only reason I think it's hard, is because I think Bill Murray treats the whole movie like he doesn't belong in it. Yeah. And that's part of the joy of Bill Murray.
Yeah.
So he's treating the whole thing like, I'm doing a character arc, or something like that. So we don't really buy the character arc, because that's how Bill Murray acts in 90% of the movies, and that's what we love about him. He's kind of like too cool for the movie, and it's kind of a weird thing that only Bill Murray pulls off in the history of mankind. So he's also the only guy that doesn't get save the cat moments, and you love him anyway. It's like his weird. Save the cat moment is, I'm going to electric shock a guy and hit a girl and lie when I'm supposed to be doing science experiments.
Yeah, he's slimy.
It's like, man, imagine if they I'm trying to think of an actor who we'd hate in doing that. You'd just be like, ooh, I don't like this guy.
Okay. But can I also say that there's, to some degree, everything you're saying to me reads as, and I've thought this before, the last act of the movie to me feels like all the stuff that he's very willing to go with. It also feels like he's a guy who's finally not bored. Life is pretty boring with him, so he just takes advantage of everything, and he finally has something to do. I mean, honestly, he kind of, you know what I mean? He kind of
purpose.
Feels like he has purpose. Like he just needed a purpose. Finding
purpose there for sure.
Yeah, he needed a purpose. Is that an arc? I guess. Yeah. I'm just saying he was always open to this.
Gotcha.
He's not that transformed of a person, though.
Yeah,
I don't really feel like that. I get what you're saying. He does sacrifice his life. But I just don't feel like he's a different person. He's not that changed of who he's going to be.
Yeah, go ahead, Jamie.
I was gonna say, even if I'll skip ahead a little bit to the B story. But
yeah.
Wait, I wanted to bring up a different arc.
Okay, go for it. Yeah.
For me, I think everything you guys just said, man, is illuminating to me as someone who's watched this a million times. I think you're right about the theme stated moment. Like, I hadn't really pulled it out like that, and I think you're right about. I think it tracks, man. Jamie,
bingo.
I was going at this like, for me, it feels like a sports movie, and they're like the underdog team versus the big guys.
Yes,
and that it's essentially a team arc, and I think they're both there. It's a team arc. It's an underdog disrespected, like they're underdogs
going from lack of respect to respectability.
Right? And I wasn't sure before you guys brought up the theme that I think you nailed. I was circling around anti-authority, something to do with anti-authority, because
that's one of his. He listed 6 things, and that's one of them.
Okay,
yes,
the reason that I bring it up is every one of the obstacles is an escalated version of authority from the previous one. So first, it's Peter, Ray, and Egon versus the university authority. Second, it's the Ghostbusters versus the private sector. Third, it's the Ghostbusters versus the EPA. Then it's the Ghostbusters versus the New York City Police Department and the New York City government. Then it's the Ghostbusters versus an ancient supernatural god. So at every step of the way, they are up against a level of authority that's bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's got to be something underneath that's like motivating the Harold Ramis and Dan Aykroyd to choose those types of obstacles and antagonism.
It's kind of got, it's like that blue collar, like you guys have already, you said, I think, Jimmy, like that blue collar, the whole upholding of the blue collar worker versus the system,
which is a very 80s thing.
It also has like snobs versus slobs.
Yeah, snobs versus,
but it's not totally there.
It's not fully fleshed out.
It's not fully fleshed out. It's not Caddyshack fleshed out.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's what's funny about that though. I went back to a beat sheet I made in 2008, like right after Save the Cat came out. I did a bunch of beat sheets on my own just to kind of study things before I wrote a movie like this. I was going into a movie, and I did a moral premise for it, and it was using your work for selfish reasons that leads to failure and lack of respect. Working for others, self-sacrifice leads to victory and respect and fame. That was my moral premise. And then the one I did, and then I refined it a little bit. Lying and conning leads to lack of respect. Proving your worth leads to respect and fame, or something like that. Earning it. Basically, you have to earn it. You have to do it the real way.
Hard work pays off.
Hard work pays off. And I think I was trying when I did it to capture the team a little more, even though I think Bill Murray is lying and conning. The other guys, they have other ways they have to earn respect, because I think they have other challenges themselves. Like, I don't think, I think you have one character who just doesn't relate to people and needs Bill Murray to help, what's it? Molds. Fungus.
I collect mold fungus.
I can't remember
spores and fungus, guys. Come on.
Yeah,
you're embarrassing me.
I was like, I couldn't get the order right. I was like, no, that's not it. So when you have that guy needs to earn it in a different way, or he has to figure out how to claim lack of respect in a different way than Bill Murray does. But they all kind of need each other to figure it out.
Yeah, I think it's there.
And Ray needs to realize that not everyone cares about what he cares about. That's how he becomes more human, right? He's got to bring himself back. Jamie, we lost your sound.
Jamie, you're talking and there's no sound.
Yeah, no, I mute, and sometimes I decide to mute instead of talk. So anyway, to go to the B story a little bit, and I'm not really jumping ahead, but just to talk about character arc. So the B story, I think, is Dana. It's Bill Murray's character with Sigourney Weaver. So their relationship, and the first thing she says to him is, which I always love this line when she says, "You remind me more of a game show host." I don't know why that line to this day kills me. There's just something perfect about it. I think the Sigourney Weaver's sophistication in this movie I've always loved. There's something that I love about Sigourney Weaver in this movie.
She's very in charge, even when she's getting scared.
Absolutely,
yeah.
She's definitely the adult in the room in the entire situation.
Absolutely, yeah.
So in the middle so she sees him coming, and I don't think she's that charmed with him at first, but then toward the midpoint when she accepts a date with him, I think he's kind of earning it again. He's not lying and conning. He's doing the same thing in the B story where he's earning her respect. He's putting in the work. He's really caring.
Are you saying in the B story that the theme stated would be the thing he says at the end of their scene in her apartment? When he says, I'll prove myself.
I'll prove myself.
Yes.
That's right there.
And so then he eventually does, right?
Then he does. That's my moral premise, right? You got to prove your worth. You can't lie and con. So at first he's lying and conning and kind of making little jokes in the apartment. And ultimately he proves himself to her, and he earns love or whatever, a relationship, just like he does in the real story throughout his arc with science, or whatever you want to call it, or being a hero. I more see it being a hero. Less
I don't think he cares about science.
Yeah. So I view this movie as a superhero origin story. And I think as we get into it, which we might as well now, if you don't mind me moving into the next section.
No, that's fine.
I just want to say that I love the superhero thing and I love the sports movie thing a lot. Both of those analogies.
So to me, this movie is structurally most similar to Superman, the movie, and Spider-Man, the movie, the Sam Raimi movie, in some ways.
All right.
Because the catalyst happens, they get thrown out of their college or whatever, and I see that as the catalyst. And then the debate section is debatable. It's debatable where it ends. Honestly, there's no right answer. It's whatever you think.
I was gonna ask Jamie, because you've brought up I said sports movie, The Mighty Ducks was the first time we talked about this. I think it has a double bump catalyst, which I had never heard of that way to talk about that until you said it.
Yeah.
And I think the first catalyst, because it's really important, is when they have that library ghost
The
encounter.
ectoplasm.
Yeah, Egon suddenly discovers that they can catch and capture ghosts, which they hadn't done before, and that's sort of like that's what makes them go like, oh, well, we could do this.
It's funny because usually when I see double bump catalysts, and double bump catalyst just means there's two beats that are kind of the catalyst, like they both need to happen for the story to kind of move. Usually when I see them, there's one mundane and one magical, so it's like I'm about to lose the house, but wow, now I have a superpower, so it's the two combined that cause the thing to happen. So Goonies,
and this is that, yeah.
Let's say Goonies, it's like we're about to lose the house and we find the map, double bump, and then when there's a thing or something like that.
That's good.
That's good, yeah.
Some people spread that out and make like the break into two, like the supernatural or vice versa.
The mundane to pair with the supernatural, and
But sometimes that takes away, which is why you need the double bump. It's like, it's like because sometimes if you don't have the debate about the supernatural, it takes away, and sometimes you need the debate about the losing the house. Like you got to find other matters before you decide to use your Spider-Man powers or something to save the house, whatever it is. So I think you're absolutely right. I think the only reason I don't categorize this one is because they put that one so early.
Yeah, it's really early.
It feels more like just part of the setup. Like, while they're dealing with this new piece of science, they get thrown out. So, but your point is absolutely valid. It is kind of important, and some people I could see just cataloging
that being the catalyst. Yeah.
It's just so early structurally.
Like it always feels like a catalyst they were even called.
That's officially their first ghost.
Yeah, it's
call,
like their
right?
first thing, except for that
because Ray walks in, he's like, "It's happening!"
It's finally
he's
happening.
so excited.
And this is another technique that I'm a big fan of, and I've talked about before. And really, for my TV book is really where I pitch this. But if you can have your setup be a story in motion, so in my opinion, their story in motion is the ramifications of the library and the ghost. That's much more fun than watching them sit around and eat breakfast and talk and go to school. So a lot of scripts I read are people sitting around eating breakfast and saying, the breakfast scene, which I hate. So I would
alarm clock at the beginning and
So I'm always like, put a story in there that we jump on board, and then have it get interrupted by the catalyst and the break into. So for me, the library story is kind of the story that's starting. It gets interrupted by you're thrown out of college. Now what are we going to do? Well, let's take that thing that we found earlier and turn it into a business, which of course our Bill Murray character is then pushing to do. So here's the part I'm not sure about. Where does the break into two happen? Because I could argue a couple things. One, it could be just them in business. Because if we say going into business is kind of the catalyst, and then the break into two is actually them in business. When I watched it last night, I was like, We Got One felt like the break into two.
Yeah. I think why it's hard. I think it's break. I think that's We Got One is it, because that's when the true upside down world begins. They are now Ghostbusters.
The music starts playing.
It also feels like it. Like the filmmaking is telling you it's the break.
This is the movie you came to see, which we're going to get into in a minute. But Jamie, I wanted to bring this up because we've talked about lock-in so much and why it isn't so black and white and easy to say that that's the end of Act One is because this doesn't really have your traditional lock-in construction.
And this is my superhero movie comparison. So think about Superman the movie or Spider-Man the movie, like those kind of movies that usually kick off with them, hey, I'm going to be Superman. And there's really no one goal. It's just
they don't know the villain yet.
Don't know the villain yet.
Stop whatever's coming at me, I guess.
It's almost like we're just going to get an episodic section of them learning to be the hero. And that's what this movie does.
Or maybe using their powers too, right?
Using their powers.
Yeah.
We're going to figure it out. We're going to put the costume on. We're going to drive the supercar. We're going to do the thing. We're going to figure it out.
The Slimer thing is them learning to use their
All
powers,
of it.
right?
Yeah. Everything you described.
And fun and games of like that usually culminate in like the public, like we're here, we're Superman now, we're Spider-Man now, and then the real story kind of kicks in, the villain kicks in, or whatever. The things get up a notch. This movie has that structure, very similar to those movies, and those fun and games of those movies, which we're about to talk about, are super fun. Like Superman the movie. That's my favorite part of that movie. Is that fun and games was so fun watching that in the theater. Spider-Man the movie, when you got the guy singing the Spider-Man song and J. Jonah Jameson, I love that part of the movie. That's like my favorite part of these movies. Same with this movie. I love this part of this movie. I love the fun and games of this movie.
The
it's
montage,
like,
you love that montage.
The montage, the jokes, the first case kind of thing. It's just so much fun with all three of those. Who's holding you in Superman, right? You know,
right.
Who's holding
so
you?
We're all on the same page that the end of Act 1.
I mean, he's slimy.
Is we got you? We got one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We got one. Yeah.
Now, the only thing I'll point out with that is if you're a Save the Cat purist, B story. So the B story is usually when a character that we've either seen before, like Dana, we've seen her before. She shows up kind of more in the hero's life. So we go, aha. This is the B story, you know, it's connect. And she shows up a little bit before the break into 2, which I think is okay. The way I teach B story is B story sometimes happens before the break into 2, and sometimes it happens right after. It usually happens right after, but sometimes it happens right before. So that's the only part. I think some people would argue that Dana showing up, which is technically their first case, could be. But to me, it still feels like that one's like Dana might pay them if she believes them, but she doesn't really believe them.
Right.
You know, it doesn't feel like.
And they don't help her in the moment.
they don't use the containment unit or the screens or anything like that. Yeah.
No, they just sent one guy using a thing he doesn't even understand how to use. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So that brings us to the fun and games and the promise of the premise.
Yes. Oh, man. So I'm really excited to just talk about the premise delivery in general. We've been, what are we? Is this episode 68?
It's episode
All right.
68.
So we've probably talked about premise delivery for 100 hours over the last 3 years. And this movie is a masterclass in premise delivery. And when I'm reading scripts, often it's the one thing that people don't get. And what I mean by that is I'll have really great plots, really interesting characters, and they can take a single scene and the dialogue snappy, and there's tons of conflict, internal, external. It's got craft galore in these scripts I'll read. But the things that I'm reading are not specific enough to the concept. So I am reading a dramatic scene in a kitchen that could take place really in any movie, right? Instead of here, we have a scene in the kitchen. What does a haunting
and it's
in
like
a
a movie
kitchen
called
look
like Vampire Babies, and it's
it's
nothing to do with vampire babies.
We're not seeing them like change a diaper that's filled with blood,
right?
Or like like I said, for instance, the kitchen scene. I will read a script that's supposed to be called Ghostbusters, and nothing in the kitchen is haunted. It's just I wanted to go around and ask you guys after all this time, like, what premise delivery is to you? Like, what do you think it is?
Jamie?
Yeah.
I probably shouldn't follow Jamie on this one, but I'll do it.
I mean, with me, it's very intuitive, so I haven't really thought of the words to put around it because it's very intuitive. But I'm going to try to put some words around it. It's whatever I see in the trailer, like the scenes and gags and jokes and excitement and fun or horror or whatever I expect to see in that movie. Like if I made a list after I saw a trailer of the fun things I'm looking forward to seeing in that movie, that's what it would be. And similarly with the log line. So if you said, 3 former parapsychology professors set up shop as unique ghost removal service, what do I in New York City? What do I expect to see in that movie? And I might start listing things like how they trap ghosts, and a car chase with a ghost or something. You know, I'll start listing things. So it's kind of like that whiteboard thing.
Yes.
That people who are the audience do when they see log lines and they see trailers. They're having their own internal dialogue of all their expectations of the fun, unique things that they'll uniquely see in that movie that they might not see in another movie. Not as
perfect.
I mean, yeah, mine would just that's a perfect answer. Mine would just be more superficial, like I told you guys. Got to deliver on the title, straight up. I'm big on titles. I think I've made that point on the show a few times. They bust ghosts. I expect to see a lot of it because that's what it's called. That's why I didn't like House of a Thousand Corpses. There was at least like 20 corpses. You gotta deliver on what you're promising me. You said the trailer. I'm saying it's even down to the title.
Man,
The Exorcist. They exercise somebody.
Better exercise.
You can't. If you're gonna put it at the top, you better do it. And this movie does.
I'm gonna get a little more clinical.
Go ahead.
Because just from a construction standpoint, Jamie, you mentioned it perfect, right? The log line, essentially, like all movies are what if questions, right? Mm-hmm. And everything is born out of this what if question. And basically, Jamie, you said it perfectly. It's what if parapsychologists, scientists get fired and start their own blue collar ghost pest control business, right? They're exterminators, but for ghosts. Okay, what the hell does that look like? Like, premise delivery is giving the audience people, places, things, scenarios, and dialogue that they could only ever see in your movie and no other movie. And when you're able to do that, when you focus on that, when you're coming up with your ideas, when you're coming up with your characters, when you're coming up with your props, when you're coming up with your settings, when you focus on like, how can I paint this with the specifics of this premise and make it something that I could only see in New York City when there's a bunch of ghosts and a bunch of scientists who are hunting them. That's when it becomes a story that people want to revisit because they could only get the experience by watching your movie. Like, the reason that this movie has stood the test of time is because the whiteboarding, the world building, the people, the places, the things are so unique and interesting. And some, like, even though it's grounded, they captured this world that like only exists in this movie. And so you want to experience this world over and over again, right? That's why like the costumes, people are still dressing up like the Ghostbusters 40 years later. You know, that's why
they have groups,
right?
That they regularly meet to do that, man.
Yeah. So I mean,
you can't do that if you don't have the cars and the symbols and the tech and all that represented on screen, right?
Yeah, for me, it's all about specificity, and I check your bingo cards because I've talked about this many times. Yeah. But you gotta be as specific as possible. Like, my number one note is not premise specific enough. I probably write that 50 times in every set of notes I do. It's good. It's entertaining, but it's not premise specific enough. Can you take the same material and make it more premise specific?
Jimmy, you talked about, I think it was Legally Blonde. I can't remember, but you talked about the action figure thing.
Yeah,
when you create your characters, make them
well, that's an exercise. Yeah,
that's an exercise. Visualize what the action figure would be like. You could say that about not even just the characters in this movie, everything
in this movie.
Even the sound design in this movie, like everything.
Terry Rossio used to have, and I think I've mentioned this before, but Terry Rossio used to have a test of concepts, and he said a good concept you can dress up for Halloween, you can dress up in the good concept. and if nobody would want to dress up as that, then you probably don't have a good concept.
But I will say also, this is not specific to like fun movies, right? Like, fun and games can also be like a serious drama. Like, sure. You know, like what's a recent example of like a serious drama that like has its own set of fun and games? Just I
was going to say, I mean, this isn't a recent example, but Kramer versus Kramer is is about divorce, and
Right.
it's
Yeah.
a father raising a kid while divorce is going on, and
Right.
that's not a fun and games topic. It's not
Right.
something I'm going to dress up for this Halloween as Kramer versus Kramer,
Right.
but it delivers on all the things we'd expect from a Dustin Hoffman drama about divorce. Yeah.
Right. They do all those same things. They're giving you people, places, things, scenarios, and dialogue that are specific to the Kramer versus Kramer concept and story world. So yeah, it's just I don't know
I don't know why I pulled Kramer versus Kramer, but that was
well, Seinfeld was just added to Netflix, so
right.
But like Bob, you've in the past, you've done a good job bouncing off this, where you just start going off of that single what if question. You can take it, you grab your whiteboard, whatever it is, your notebook, your app, and your phone, whatever it is that you use for idea generation, and you just start asking questions, right? Like
yeah, what would their car look like? What would they use as a car? What would thematically work as a car?
Right.
How about a car that they get a car that usually has dead people in it, and they're there to capture dead spirits?
Right.
What would they use? How would they capture them? What would they use? Where do they put them when they're done?
Yeah.
What kind of suits do they wear? They look like exterminators.
What's their costume look like?
Right.
Here's my favorite one. What does a job interview look like? When you are interviewing to be a Ghostbuster, you're asked, do you believe in UFOs, astral projections, mental telepathy, ESP, clairvoyance, spirit photography, telekinetic movement, full trance mediums, the Loch Ness Monster, and the theory of Atlantis? That is so specific, right? Like they took the time and they were like, what are all these scenarios that we could play with that you could only get in this movie?
If you look at also, like you say, like they're the ultimate. This is the ultimate play on like the blue collar job, civil servant type thing. You've got exterminators, you've got funeral directors, you've got firemen, and you take all those disparate things on your whiteboard and you add them, you squish them together, and they turn into the Ghostbusters. You know what I mean?
And you just start riffing off of that.
Right. And you start,
But Jimmy and we have this term that we kind of invented for this called premise paint. Right.
Yes.
And you have different. It's almost like if you could imagine your palette out there. And you have a little bit of New York City. You have a little bit of like blue collar worker. You have a little bit of
their occupation
ghosts, and you start mixing them together. So you might take the most basic trope of the ghost world and then mix them with some New York City. So
what does that look like? Yeah,
that might get you those the stone creatures that show up later on or something, or the or the library being a haunted house. You paint haunted house with New York City and you get that library, or something like that. So you just mix up the different aspects of your premise, the different colors of your palette, so to speak. And just by combining two things, you usually can come up with a lot of ideas.
You get something fresh that you could only get with your concept
also
in your world.
Combining two well-known things. Two tropes or two things that the average person would actually know what you're talking about, right?
That's right.
Everyone knows what a hearse is. Everyone knows what a firehouse looks like. Everyone knows what a fire pole does and why they have it, right?
Yeah. No, exactly. Like I love how you said, like a library in New York City becomes a haunted house, right? That's a perfect example. And like, what does an apartment high rise look like in a movie about Ghostbusters? It becomes the gateway for an ancient ghost god to come through. Like it's not just an ordinary apartment building. Instead, it's this long-standing cult headquarters, like things like that.
Could you even put it down to like, what does possession look like in our movie? Instead of it being like something like The Exorcist, not to keep mentioning The Exorcist, but what if these giant monster dogs actually consume people and that somehow creates the actual possession? Like you change it up too, like right, that's whiteboard stuff, right?
Absolutely.
Or like the Rick Moranis character, you have him like he's a premise people and you paint him with a little possession. What does that look like?
What does that look like? Yeah. So it's just about, Jamie, that's right, the premise palette, and that palette has all these different colors. It has genre color, it has setting color, it has character color and their occupation and their skill sets, and it has all the and I often read scripts that aren't playing with all those colors. They have them. They know what they are. They've got everything, right? They've got their concept, and they've got a great concept. And we've talked about this in the past, Jamie, but they'll have this great concept that you can picture the movie in your head, right? Just like the audience does. And you're like, this is going to be great. And they only have like 2 scenes that actually deliver on the promise of the premise and play with all those paint colors that those premise paints that we just talked about. Whereas if you do the whiteboarding and you spend enough time on it, you can make the whole movie fun and games, essentially.
I'll end it on this too. Like,
yeah, we can move on.
What if Godzilla was a marshmallow?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that just comes from asking questions. They were probably, there was that story that they went on this retreat. They probably got high and they were like, what if maybe they were roasting marshmallows? What if
Godzilla was made of marshmallows? Yeah, like there it is.
But we can move on from that. I just thought we got to talk about the whiteboard in this episode because it's a masterclass in premise delivery. Ghostbusters.
So yeah. And speaking of break into 2, this one is a weird one again because it's a superhero thing where the goal isn't super tangible. It's let's be a success in business. There is kind of a ticking clock on the money. Like they right before I got one, they're eating the Chinese food and they're like, this meal is the last of our petty cash. So it shows that this is their last thing. But once the fun and games, there's not a lot of like obstacles or will they go out of business. It's just kind of a rise up. It's just rise up to the top.
After they charge for the Slimer job, we kind of assume
$5,000.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So usually when you're constructing these stories, like the way I suggest you go from the break into 2, you have the midpoint. And the key is the fun and games should reach this kind of inevitable either victory or failure. Like sometimes it's a failure. Sometimes it's this job isn't going to work. And that's the midpoint. But other times it's like, we did this thing. It's a small victory in the bigger picture. And I think this one kind of reaches that point. And I actually go so far as to say there's 2 things I want to talk about. There's kind of a moment of grace there when Bill Murray goes to Sigourney and he has that moment with after the concert, he talks to her and he does his little twirl when he gets the dance. And I think that's him earning her respect. Like she's seen what he's done on television. Now he talks to her and he's come up with some breaks in her case. He's actually put in some work. So he gets that little taste, that little moment of grace where he's like, he earns it with her as well in the B story.
If there was no ghost stuff happening, they would just have dated normally from that moment on.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
What I mean? Like if nothing else happened,
Yeah, no, I think you're right. So some people might peg the midpoint actually as the date. It's like he gets the date, but she's possessed and it takes it up.
Good news, bad news.
It's a good news, bad news. And that could be, again, this is all in the eye of the beholder. For whatever reason, my 2008 brain always pegged it as when he gets the date. And that because the next scene is kind of the false victory of it all. It feels like we've arrived, we're done, everything's solved. And the next scene is the EPA guy.
Walter Peck, right? Yeah.
And that seems like a signal to say, oh, this success, this meteoric rise they had in the fun and games has its downside. Mm-hmm. And we're about to click into the downside. We're about to click into that world where he's going to kind of put some tension on them, as well as, and Jimmy, you can speak to this too, the rising ghostly ticking clock within New York City.
Yeah, because they plant the seed. He wants to see the containment unit, and that's promising a culmination of that unit being put at stake, and so all the ghosts that they just caught, all their victories could easily be undone, and most likely are going to be undone. Yeah.
And also, so if I can just interrupt for 1 second, the one thing about this movie, like we didn't really talk about because we're doing this structure, but the why now of it, like the reason they got the original call to the library is because this is all finally happening, right? Like the reason that ghost shows up in the first place
Yeah.
is because the antenna is finally pulling in actual.
It's very loose as
very
to
loose.
why now, but there is a description of it.
And what I'm trying to say is like, looking back, like re-engineering it backward in your mind, that is the ticking clock starting.
Mm-hmm.
And they're slowing it down when we get to the fun and games by capturing all the ghosts.
Right.
Like,
right.
You know, like
and
Gozer
Lewis
needs
even says that they're prisoners.
Yeah.
When he's possessed, whatever his name is. Yeah.
Like they've slowed it down. Like they've you know, and then the EPA agent is coming.
That's a good point.
To reopen to make the clock start spinning again. Right?
Yeah.
Like I think that's something that's not really expressed in the movie, but if you've seen it 100 times, you start to realize.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I hadn't really thought of it until you brought it up. There's two why nows, and to Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong about where this definition, you know, this technique comes from. But David Mamet was a showrunner on some show on CBS. I can't remember what it was, and he put up this. It was
a cop show of some. I can't remember now.
Or military show, one of the two.
Yeah.
The details aren't that important, but he put this memo. He was pissed off at his writing team, and I'm sure he wasn't very nice about it. But there's this famous memo that's out there of David Mamet talking about, and he used this as for writing scenes. Why must a scene happen now and at no other time on the story's timeline will it work? And I think, and we've talked about this on the show, I think you guys agree with me, like you can use that for the story itself. Why does this story have to happen now and no other time in the story world's timeline? And it creates this built-in urgency for the whole story. And
if Ghost just existed prior to the opening scene, why is there not other Ghostbusters? Why are they starting now instead of figuring this out earlier, right?
Right. And there's these little seeds, like I'm sure, Bob, because you have an encyclopedic knowledge of this movie, you will remember this, but I didn't notice before until we were looking for these talking points, both in the library and in the hotel. The person who's talking to the Ghostbusters mentions that there's been activity, but it's never been like this.
Yeah,
like they describe to the Ghostbusters like it's never been like this before. So we're getting all the scenarios. We're being told like this is bigger than it's ever been. So, and it's motivated to that why now you just talked about.
Right. Like before the movie started, it had our level of paranormal activity.
Normal, grounded.
In my basement, I hear weird noises every now and then, but I can't explain it.
But it's escalating because the end of the world is coming. And Jamie, were you about to hit on that?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. By the way, it's David Mamet, the Unit, which is a covert operations team show. But if you want to look up,
that's a funny title.
If you want to look up, exactly. If you want to look up that memo, that's what you can look up. No, I was just saying that we slowly edge more and more towards this thing. But as the bad guys comes in, you know, in the next couple sections, it's. You know, we get the Twinkie and all, you know, everything. We get it. Just we see that this is really a thing, that it's almost like an environmental disaster, so to speak. You know, of the supernatural proportions.
It's treated that way,
yeah.
Started by the EPA itself.
Started by the EPA itself. So it's debatable where you want to pin the midpoint because there's so many parts. But I just I view that scene where he gets the date. There's also a part where he says, "I respect you" to her. That's not a joke. It's like the first time he's
as
not
an artist.
Yeah. He's like, well, when he says, "I respect,"
but he does make a joke right after it, though. He does. Say, and as a dresser, this is a ensemble we're wearing.
And then he backs off of it. Like he kind of says, "Yeah, I respect you as an artist," but he kind of is trying to be a little serious at that time. And then when she asks him out on the date, it's kind of a slight turning point. And then almost immediately after that, we do get to the possession and, you know, her getting possessed, him following up with her possession, and things are about to get really bad supernaturally. And I think Egon even says, like, very shortly after that his reading suggests things are about to get really bad supernatural.
Yeah, really bad. Yeah.
That's also where the conversation between Ray and Winston come in, which I think signals, now the characters are starting to realize it's the end of the world, right?
That's right.
Yeah, that's my favorite scene in the whole script. I wanted to talk about it with you guys about like the craft here. Like it's played straight. There's no jokes until the end to break the tension, just like all the great scenes in this movie are. And it sort of redefines everything that we saw before. Like it recontextualizes it and says like, oh shit, like this is a real event we didn't know about that were, and promises like the culmination that's coming in a serious way, right? Like they're both
Using
scared.
Actual religious
something that's
right?
real. Yeah.
Right.
So I think it's really well done. I think it's like the most important scene in the movie. And like if you take that out, I don't think the third act has the weight that it does. I think this like plants the seed in your mind that the third act is coming in the way that we're gonna see it. Yeah.
And also, to say in that scene, I think that really cements too. Like you said, Jamie, Vakeman, or one of you said Vakeman was sort of like the audience, but that scene also cements that Winston is truly he's more the everyman than Vakeman will ever be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's speaking for the people that view your premise in a different light. Like when you talk about ghosts, let's be honest, you can't just separate ghosts from religion all the time in people's minds. So it's like the movie's actually commenting on what the audience might be thinking too, right?
Let's talk about that a little bit. Winston showing up in the middle of this movie is one of the more oddball things you'll ever see in a movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just strange, right? It's like it's almost like they're preparing for the second movie or something. Like if this were a TV series and up to the midpoint was season 1 and this was season 2 and we needed some new blood in there to kind of introduce things. It's really odd. And I don't really have any other explanation for it other than it was a product of the rewrites or something and they didn't want to get an extra character in there. It's strange though. It's a strange thing.
It's really weird.
And he's given the last line of the movie. I mean, he's given the cap on everything.
I don't really have anything to say about it except maybe I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for your scripts.
No.
It's like probably the only time it's ever worked or something like this.
It really, couldn't think of this movie without him, but it's very weird.
It's strange. I could kind of think of this movie without him. I'm not saying it hurts it at all. I think it helps it, but I could imagine it just playing without him as well, which makes it all the more weird.
I'd
that it
argue
works.
He brings something to the four of them that they didn't have. Like each of them brings something different, and Winston most certainly does, right?
Yeah.
Like
the everyman most yes.
Like he is, he's the everyman through and through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
he even talks about needing to get his own lawyer.
It's
things like that.
The fact though that you survived to the midpoint without an everyman almost tells me you don't need the everyman in this movie.
That's also true.
You know, it's very strange. Again, it's not a criticism because I like that he comes in. I think it's kind of fun, but it's weird. It's a weird thing.
Weird.
I can't explain it. I got no theories on this one. I'm a Winston.
Me neither, except for
how's this? Like you almost needed the thing where like they started their own business and then they needed an employee, and the three of them are kind of the bosses. So you can get lines like "This is not worth $11,500 a year." None of them could say that.
Right.
Only Winston could say it, reminding everyone he's on a job. He's a firefighter. Firefighters risk their lives to go on the job, and they were not compensated enough for it. We know that.
Right.
No,
so he's that kind of character.
Most movies would have included that around the break into two. That would have been part of the debate.
He would have been part of that building the team in the fun and games section. Yeah.
It's strange. I'd almost challenge our listenership of thousands to come up with another movie that has anything analogous to this, because my gut says it could happen in a superhero movie. Like if you had an Avengers movie and you brought somebody on the team or an X-Men movie, after the midpoint, I could kind of see it, maybe.
Yeah, cheeseburgers. I couldn't think of anything. Indie movies do it all the time, where like like I'm sure there's plenty of Coen Brothers stories where this really important character doesn't show up until 50 minutes in, and things that. But as far as the cheeseburgers, man, like the ones we talk about, the blockbusters, I don't know.
Not only are we bringing him in, but he's the least famous of the group, right?
Yeah.
And he's on the poster, but he comes in late, like in the back half. It's just really odd. But that's one of the unique things about this movie, and it works. It works for me. I like it.
Yeah, if you watch the episode of what was it, Movies That Made Us, this movie is an 11th hour miracle too. I mean, we don't really talk about that, but like they barely finished this movie, so there's probably a lot of edits and cutting going on,
right? And I think it comes back to like that, like I said at the beginning, he was handed a script. He signed up for a script where he signed up to do a job, literally a job, to where he showed up in the movie on page 8 and had this rich backstory, and he got a script that's where he showed up on page 68 and had no backstory, and then just said, whatever you want me to believe, I'll believe it, which wasn't the nature of his character when he agreed to do the role. So, yeah, I'm sure it has something to do with that.
I mean, them not having a non-scientist, too.
Yeah.
It with what they're seeing, I don't know, it plays into it. I don't know.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
Because technically, Venkman is a scientist, even though he's terrible at it. I mean,
you never studied.
He never studied, right? We were on.
I think the bad guys, and I'll go through this. Yeah. I'll go through this kind of quickly because it's really good. It's again, the possession happens. Peter arrives at Dana's. There's all kinds later on when they say like, the cougar went nuts at the party, and Dana's possessed, and you get all that stuff. So things are getting worse and worse. And skipping down to it kind of culminates on possessed Dana kind of waking up. Possessed Lewis is walking around the city, and then we hit the Ghostbusters get busted by the EPA. I think that happens right before it. So that's kind of a dark.
Don't forget, right before that, technically speaking, Lewis gets a small arc in that all his dreams are realized while he's possessed. He gets to have sex with Dana, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he technically, even though they're both not of their mind.
Right.
Yeah. He has a false victory of his own.
Right. Without knowing it even happened. Like that's how much of a kind of a nerdy loser he is.
Yeah, so the EPA shows up, shuts things down. That's really that's what I peg as the all is lost. The Dark Night of the Soul is Dana and Lewis, kind of monsters running around free while the Ghostbusters are in jail. Peter gets briefed on Dana's building, and it's all that stuff going on. They ultimately get to the break into 3 where they, the mayor helps them, gets them out of lockup, and they're free to go save the city after the penthouse becomes spooked, etc. I'm skipping over a lot of this.
I wanted to talk about the Dana's building exposition scene. Do you want to? This is your classic example of Pope in the Pool. Do you want to explain to the listeners what Pope in the Pool is?
Sure. So Pope in the Pool is a rule by Blake Snyder that says whenever you have an exposition scene, you need a Pope in the pool.
Yeah. That's it. Just put
all
it
right,
in a
let's
scene
move on to the next point. No, next
point. And there's a Pope in there swimming.
So every time I write an exposition scene, I always have a Pope in the background in the pool. So he talks about some movie that had an expositional scene where there was a Pope swimming in the pool, and they were talking about something boring and expositional, but the whole time the audience was locked on the Pope, like taking his outfit off and swimming laps and things like that.
Yeah.
The Pope in the Pool is simply putting something like visual or entertaining in the background to mix in with your expositional scenes to keep them exciting and fun.
Yeah, it's like, how do you take a scene where we're talking about really boring stuff or really exciting stuff to some in the audience, but the words that are being spoken are really hard to follow along with. Well, you have them in a jail cell, and you have a bunch of prisoners with them who are all sort of like, they're all audience surrogates and they don't know what the hell's going on. And you also have that conflict of Egon talking about like people who are like evil, and he's really nervous about everyone around him thinking he's talking about them, and
society was too sick to survive. Then he
and so there's that extra tension. So it's a great example of how to take a scene that, instead of just the Ghostbusters sitting around a table talking about this, it's the Ghostbusters sitting around a table in a jail cell with a bunch of prisoners with them. And that's like your classic Pope in the pool. I also wanted to bring up, and then we can move on. This, Jamie, you talk about this all the time, how like the easiest way to make exposition interesting in general is to bury it with a joke. And I think one of the most instructive things this movie does is every single scene where there's exposition, they bury it with a joke. There's Egon talking about the scientific reasons why the firehouse is unsuitable for them. Suddenly Ray slides down with the pole. Hey, this thing still works. Right. And don't cross the streams. Peter asks why, and they tell him a very scientific reason.
That's bad.
Oh, okay, that's bad. Important safety tip. Thanks, Egon. Explaining the containment unit. Ray finishes off the containment unit with a little jingle. When the light is green, the trap is clean. Egon's calculations that you were just talking about, the infamous Twinkie scene, right? He uses the Twinkie to describe the bad stuff that's about to. That's a big Twinkie. The gatekeeper, Lewis, now that he's the gatekeeper, tells his whole villain's plan to a horse. and then he tells the horse driver that he's gonna burn, and he says, what an asshole. Yeah. Like every single scene in this movie, if you're looking for inspiration for how to make your exposition interesting, this is a great example. Watch every exposition scene in this movie and how they bury the exposition with a joke. It's just awesome. I loved it. That was like my favorite thing upon rewatch of like how well that's craft.
I mean,
that is craft.
Even when
that's
they say
writing.
When Egon warns about what's about to go down and in the jail cell, and Bill Murray says, like he starts thinking somebody's coming.
Right.
So
and then when they're talking to the mayor, right? Cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria. Yeah. Right. So that's they're burying the exposition with a joke. So it's just, I got really jazzed because I was like, that's craft. Because I don't know, a lot of people talk about this movie and the greatness of the movie, and they don't really talk about the script. Mm-hmm. And I think that this movie is just great craft all around.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Just to recap, Dark Knight of the Soul, they're still in prison. The supernatural Armageddon is coming to a crescendo. The break into 3, they convince the mayor. The mayor trusts them. They were quacks in the beginning that science didn't trust. And now the mayor puts his trust in them to actually save the day. They kind of earned the trust. That's kind of my arc thing coming together. My theory of
They even earned the trust of the religious figure,
Even the religious figure. So New York City trusts them now. So they've gone from these kind of quacks, jokes, people made fun of and rolled their eyes at, to people that are actually, they believe there's faith in them. They have faith in that the Ghostbusters are the only thing that can save the day. So then of course, there's the finale. It's got a classic 5-point finale kind of structure. It starts with the team. They kind of get there, the cheering, they get suited up, they arrive, they look up, they're ready to go. Storm the castle. They walk up many steps.
I think it's such a great storming.
They survive they survive the crumbling building first.
They survive the crumbling
building.
That's
kind of like a early Hightower surprise.
Yeah, it is. It's the start of it, because they do get up there. They turn on the proton packs, and their initial attacks don't work against this thing's too powerful for them. So to me, that's the Hightower surprise. Like, our old ways aren't going to work. So they have to dig down deep. And then again, this is me kind of manufacturing my thing. You have Venkman deciding to be sacrificial. He's willing to give up his life for New York City, for the job, to earn the respect, to win the day. And he does something that, It's debatable whether he do in the beginning. I can see Bob's point, and they cross the streams.
I can see your point too. To be fair,
yeah. Again, I think the Bill Murray of it throws it off a little bit.
Yeah.
So they cross the streams, which is a secret weapon that we've talked about in the past. The secret weapon is something that's usually set up in the
Chekhov's gun.
Chekhov's gun, set up in the first half, but it's the Deus. It's kind of like setting up your Deus Ex Machina, so it's not Deus Ex Machina. It's kind of like the Deus Ex cheat code.
I forgot that this was it's the secret weapon. There it is.
This is the big secret weapon. This is almost our typical example.
Yeah,
kind of like
prototypical. Yeah.
The loader in Aliens is another one that comes to mind. There's the crane technique in the Karate Kid. Whatever the secret weapon
force
is.
field spacesuit in Guardian of the Galaxy Volume 2.
And it's premise specific. We could only see it in this movie. That's why it's awesome.
Use the force, Luke, to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the cross the streams. It works. Marshmallow Man destroyed. Oh, I guess the Hightower surprise I skimmed over is probably really the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man is a big part of it too.
Yeah.
That's the big Hightower surprise. That's like the capper to the Hightower surprise. And then they have to dig down deep, cross the streams. Execution of the new plans crossing the streams.
Yeah.
Kaboom. Closing image. They return to kind of the rabid Ghostbuster loving crowd. Bill gets a kiss from Dana. He's earned it. He's earned a kiss. And they're heroes now. They've gone from quacks to heroes, and that is their arc, which is usually how it's hit in the closing image. So that's my Save the Cat beat sheet for Ghostbusters.
Yeah, and the only reason I would argue the Bill Murray thing again is that in that scene, even though there's nothing said, he still seems like he's really sucking in the fame. So, you know what I mean? Like, even though, yes, he did just risk his life, he also knew what risking his life meant if it worked. I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's hard. It's a hard argue there.
Yeah. It's Bill Murray. I'm sure he does his own thing when you say action. He's probably like, I'm not going to, Bill, just act serious. Like you're excited. He's probably doing his own, trying to make it funny.
Bill, say that you're going to go with the plan. And then he says something like, this is a great plan. I'm happy to be a part of it. Let's go. He's being sarcastic when he's probably told to be sincere in that moment.
This is a great plan.
That makes it all the better. Yeah.
There's a great thing in the ending that I wanted to talk about. That's like a really brief also craft is the idea not just of escalation of the story getting bigger as like gradually as we've talked about the importance of like making it a rising thing and not flat. But there is like a rule of three, like repetition escalation of the slime. Like Venkman is grossed out the first time he sees the slime. Then the second time he's fully slimed. So we're seeing the same thing, only bigger. And then in the climax, the entire city is slimed except for him. He's the only one that's not slimed, which I thought it's just a great example of how to take like an idea and make it bigger and do the same thing with it, only bigger. And we've seen that in many movies that we've talked about before, but it's a nice little tool to use.
I mean, and the EPA guy gets the slime. That's
his biggest.
His nemesis gets the most slime possible, or shaving cream, depending on how you want to talk about it.
That's like there's probably another word for that. It's kind of like a trope, but we should come up with a word. It's kind of like when Kong, the guy who brought Kong in, gets stepped on. You know, there's something about that. Yeah, there's a bit it is Schadenfreude, really, in some ways. It's some kind of
the guy who gets eaten by the T-Rex in Lost World.
Right. Yeah. That's a trope that always lands and always gets a big pop from the audience. Yeah.
And this is a fun one because that guy didn't die. He just got covered in marshmallow. So it's like,
They need some comeuppance, some humiliation at the end of the day.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
My question is, can you eat the marshmallow? Is it like normal marshmallow?
I know. I've always wondered that.
Yeah. I think that does bring. Unless you guys have anything else, I think that brings us to the end.
No, we've talked enough about it. Yeah.
We didn't talk about the song.
Let's talk at length. Another 2 hours about the song. Do you guys have anything that you want to plug?
I have. Okay. Our latest feature film, What Happens Next Will Scare You, is it's a horror comedy. Speaking of horror comedies, it is playing at the virtual Salem, since we're doing this is our Halloween episode. It is playing at the virtual Salem Horror Fest, October 22nd to 31st. So check that out if you're interested. That's all I got.
Jamie, got anything?
Yeah,
I know you got a book.
No, buy the book, Save the Cat Writes for TV. By the way, signed copies are now available on savethecat.com.
Damn. All
yeah,
right.
when I went to LA a couple weeks ago, I signed a bunch. So the thing I was going to plug today, Comedy of Horrors is playing at the Freak Show Horror Film Festival in Orlando at 7:30 p.m. on October 30th. So go check it out. I directed one of the shorts. It's got a Muppet in it. It's got Jimmy Bellinger. You'll love it. Go check it out.
That's awesome.
And I'm just going to keep plugging the fact that there is a YouTube channel that I mirror everything on, including this show, Thunder Grunt Podcast. There's a link to it on thundergrunt.com. And other than that, I'm good. You guys are good, right?
Yeah, this was so much fun.
Yeah, I'm glad we did this. I can't believe it took 68 episodes to get the Ghostbusters, but we got there. So
you guys taught me the theme and the arc. I didn't. This is great.
I mean, now I feel more shaky on it than I ever did.
I have
to watch that video about the
oh yeah, Patrick Willems. Oh yeah, plug that video. The great Patrick Willems. It's Ghostbusters. What is it actually about? I think it's called. But he talks about some of the very similar things we do, but much faster and much less time.
Do you guys think we'll do the Ghostbusters Afterlife?
I hope so. I'd like to.
I mean, I'd like to. I'm definitely going to see it.
Yeah.
I'm strangely, I know there's a lot of debate about that movie, like it's not Ghostbustery enough or whatever, but for me, it hits like two of my favorite things because it's Spielberg, as we've already established.
Amblin-ish,
it's very Amblin-ish. I know that Spielberg's not involved, but it has those tropes. It definitely feels like it. Yeah. And it has the Ghostbusters stuff. And every time I see the trailer, I get super excited about it.
I'm excited.
And also, I mean, Jason Reitman I think there's a lot of calls of nepotism and stuff. And I'm like, the guy made a lot of good movies before he got here. So he did prove himself. I don't know.
Not to open a can of worms, but the animated series always showed me there was like more to Ghostbusters than, like, I love the original Ghostbusters, but I think you can expand and go down all different kind of paths with it. And I sort of feel like that's what, not Jamie, that this is like the animated series.
I'd even argue that Extreme Ghostbusters was really good. The cartoon Extreme Ghostbusters.
Haven't seen it.
It's the same basic thing, but it has the writing is just as good as the real Ghostbusters. Like,
that's awesome.
And I recently watched it now at this age, and I was actually entertained. You could do so much more with the premise.
Yeah. I'm surprised this premise hasn't been stretched out to a much bigger franchise potential than it has over the years. And I guess it's because the original guys, just what they wanted to do with it versus studios.
Bill Murray.
Yeah, pretty much.
To get him to budge on anything for years was impossible. So, I mean, if it wasn't for him, there would have been a timely 3.
That's why I sort of don't mind this new thing. Because again, I think the concept alone has a lot to do. And I'll still love my Bill Murray. I love my Bill Murray. But if they want to do some other stuff with it, I think
open it up.
Potential. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know I'm not in the majority. Well, I might be in the majority. There's probably a vocal minority that doesn't believe that's true.
No.
I am excited. I actually love every Ghostbusters movie.
So, so most likely then we'll do it. Most likely that'll be a future episode. Watch out for that.
Yeah.
It's my most want to see movie that's coming out.
Mine too.
Yeah.
So there you go.
I have to think about it, but sure. I think I'm going to be forgetting something, but sure. Okay.
All right.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Thanks. Bye.
You have just listened to Writer's Blockbusters, a screenwriting podcast featuring 2 professionals and another guy. Available only on Thunder Grunt.